Hey folks, it's Laura with Raintree Nursery. And today I have the opportunity to visit a project that is very special to my heart. This is the community orchard of West Seattle. I got a chance to design and install this garden 10 years ago in 2011, and it's on the campus of South Seattle Community College. This was a really fun project because there were a bunch of people in this local neighborhood community. This college is seated in a residential district in West Seattle. And several people from the local sustainability group got together and said, you know what, we would love to be able to get an orchard and a food production example here at the local college. We think that they have lots of land here and some of it's just not doing anything. Let's see if we can partner with them to create an example of sustainable food production that can be accessed by everybody in the neighborhood. And after some negotiations with the school, they thought it was a pretty good idea too. They gave us access to 6,000 square feet, which is about the size of a standard Seattle home property that was on what they considered to be marginal land. There's a whole bunch of parking lots over here. There is a green belt and a large ravine on the east side of this strip of land. This long, narrow strip of land that was just a lawn. They said, okay, see what you can do with this spot. And so we did. We made a design that has all kinds of different elements. And one of the things that I love about designing with perennial food plants is that you can start off with one idea about how you think your garden's going to function. You might end up with a totally different idea about how the garden actually functions. But what doesn't change is the fact that the perennial food plants, you plant them once and they get better every year. They just improve the soil, they hold moisture, they crank out food for both you and other beings on the property. They do their job while the vision and the use of the space may change through time. What doesn't change is that you still get to harvest. So when we first designed this garden, we wanted to have it be both full of teaching opportunities and also full of food production. So we created what we called pocket gardens at the very entrance of the whole land. And this is one of the pocket gardens. This one talks about how you can grow plants both for food production and also for wildlife benefit. And I love these little signs. The National Wildlife Federation will send you these if you can prove that you're providing food, water, cover, and places to raise your young in your yard. It's a wonderful sign, makes me feel good every time I see it, and it helps to remind me that I'm not just planting for human beings. Another example of a pocket garden we have right over here is a group of Northwest native plants that produce food. We have Oregon grape, which produces beautiful, deep red, very powerful berries in the early summer. We have C.O.W.S that produces almost a blueberry-like berry here in the late summer that dry really nicely into like raisins that aren't total sugar bombs. We even have the beautiful evergreen huckleberry that grows and fruits in sun or shade. They have lots of gorgeous little tiny dark berries. Small but powerful goodness. Here we have an example of a rustic apple espalier. And we were able to create a trellis by using simple T-posts and wire. We were able to plant multiple trees closely together and not allow them to get too tall, but let them branch out and create this beautiful wall of fruit. This is a gorgeous maturing espalier. Here's an example of the difference between the types of espaliers that Raintree sells and a regular apple that's been pruned into a general espalier form. So you can see how there are branches that aren't exactly opposite one another. In a regular apple tree, the branches don't grow exactly opposite each other. In a formal espalier, when people are building the tree, they literally graft a bud of a new branch exactly opposite where they know another branch will come out. So you have this very symmetrical form. Rustic espaliers using real trees aren't quite that particular. So you end up with this lovely, slightly opposite pattern here, and all kinds of fruiting spurs. There's 5 different types of apples in this espalier form, and they all came from Raintree. There are a couple of other elements that are in play here in this rustic espalier. Number one, you're seeing branches down very low. Normally in a formal espalier, you wouldn't see branching quite this low, but this is all about food production. We're trying to create as many spurs as possible here. So you're seeing fruit that's coming up even a foot above the ground. You're not mowing around this. So you're able to do things like plant comfrey, which is a chop and drop fertility and soil conditioner right here in the root zones of these plants. You also see oregano and calendula, which offer blooms to bring in pollinators and can also be used to both chop and drop to increase the soil fertility and the tilth. And you can harvest the blooms, you can harvest things to make salves. I mean, there's all kinds of production just right here on top of what's happening in the espalier itself. And right here, opposite the apple espalier, we have a beautiful and thriving patch of golden raspberries. These are fall gold, so they bear the majority of their fruit in the fall. You can see the previous year's canes. You can see this year's canes and the fruit that they're getting ready to put out, because I have found that raspberries are some of the most productive fruiting plants you can grow in a smaller space. It made natural sense to put a nice big patch of raspberries right here in a public garden. So part of the mandate of a teaching garden is not only that it teaches people while they walk through the garden, but that we were teaching neighbors while we were installing the garden together 10 years ago. And this is a great example of that. This is a blueberry patch. When we got these blueberry plants, they were little, like this big. And what we did was we excavated a trench where we knew the blueberries were going to go. We filled it full of really rotten, punky wood that would hold moisture all summer long for these really moisture-hungry plants. And then we backfilled with a little bit of soil and we planted the blueberries on top. In a public garden where you don't always have people who are here to water, you want to try to make your plants as water independent as possible, especially water hungry plants like blueberries. Since we get almost no water in the summer here in Seattle, that was a natural strategy to use to set up the growing conditions that these blueberries would really want. And look at them now. These are some really happy plants. And then of course right here, we have a beautiful pollinator garden with things that bloom early, mid, and late season, and a little bit of visual interest as well. One of the things that I have come to learn on public projects is that you have to use the structure you're given if you've got it. Now, here is a chain link fence. We really wanted them to take the fence down, or at least make an opening in the fence, but the school, being a school and an administration, they didn't want to do that. So we took the problem and made it into a solution. This gorgeous chain link fence now supports fabulous grapes. They're wonderful, they're tasty, and they provide a beautiful visual buffer between the garden itself and the school beyond. You can kind of get a sense of the school over there, but it's not so omnipresent. And in fact, all that concrete from the parking lot actually helps the grapes to grow a little bit better. So yeah, we took that problem and made it into a solution. I remember 10 years ago when we planted these fruit trees, and they were little. You look at a tree like that and you never think it's going to amount to much. But in only 10 years, we now have really big, heavily bearing fruit trees. We've got that beautiful plum over there. Here's another plum right here. We've got another plum right here. Here's a cherry, another plum, another cherry, a cherry, more cherries. In just 10 years, now we have a canopy of fruit. One of the things you learn when you start installing public gardens is that you have to ask for a lot of donations. And many of these plants were donated. In fact, this Italian prune plum was the only mature tree that we were able to get donated for this project. In fact, I have a picture of when we planted this tree with my kids in front of it. It's good to have at least one mature thing in your landscape so people get a chance to have an idea of what things will look like when everything's mature. And this beautiful tree has certainly matured beautifully, as my kids have too, I have to say. Another great example of what's happening here is what's called a guild. A guild is when you put several different types of plants all together and the sum is greater than the parts. Usually there are layers of plants that are producing in layers all together here. We have the ground cover of the comfrey right over there. We have an herbaceous layer of herbs. We have the sweet cicely, and we have the catnip. We have a bush layer right over here, the gumi, that's also fixing nitrogen off to the side of the tree. And then we have the tree itself. And there's one other friend back here. There's a rhubarb who's being happy and productive in the shade. So we have 5 different layers of production going on, all under the canopy of this beautiful, mature, and productive tree. Speaking of how projects change over time, it's been real interesting to me to stay in touch with some of the folks that I worked with when we installed this project 10 years ago. This project originally was for neighbors to come together and have the excitement of creating something together, learning how to install a garden. A lot of those people have gone on to install another food garden in the neighborhood. And in fact, what's happened here is that the mission of this particular garden has kind of changed from neighborhood coalition building to more of a student-led food sovereignty focus. And so now it's the students that come and maintain the garden, harvest the food, and distribute it to some of the students in need. I love how the mission of a garden can change over time and grow. And now we're a little bit deeper into the garden, and this was where we decided to put examples of annual food production. Not only is this annual food production, but it's also where we're showing people how to allow things to go to seed. So we have some lettuce that's going to seed. We have borage that is both flowering and seeding. We've got some choys seeding. We also have some perennial food plants here. We've got horseradish, we've got mint, we've got parsleys and cilantro. This is a no muss, no fuss garden. This is the kind of garden where you plant it and you get to wildcraft from a garden. I like that. That's simple. It's easy. It's elegant. I like it. And now we're at the very most protected end of the garden. And this is where we decided we would actually store our hardscape elements and our tools. There was a lot of wild rose here in this garden. We took some of it out, but we left some of it to act as a screen to make this area less visible and a little bit less attractive to potential thievery. So we've got all of our bamboo poles back here. We have our composting bins back here. We have our wheelbarrows. And we have a lockbox for the tools so everything does stay safe. It's important to take good care of your tools because a lot of those were donated too. And that's it. It's Laura from Raintree Nursery. Thank you for joining me on the visit back to Community Orchard of West Seattle. It's been a joy to share this with you. We'll see you next time.